There was a moment, sitting in my car outside my own apartment, when I couldn't remember if I'd actually said the thing I was sure I'd said, or if I'd only thought about saying it and somehow convinced myself it happened. That scared me more than anything else that year. I want to back up and tell you how I got there, because none of it started with anything dramatic. It started with someone who remembered things differently than I did. Small things, at first. I'd say something like, "You told me you'd pick up the dry cleaning," and he'd tilt his head, genuinely confused, and say, "I never said that." "Why would I say that?" "You always do this." And I'd pause. Because, did I imagine it? Had I misheard him? I started carrying a mental notebook, replaying conversations after they happened, trying to pin down what was actually said versus what I thought was said. I told myself this was just me being careful. Thorough. A good communicator, even. I worked in marketing at the time, a job that required me to be sharp, reading a room, catching details, remembering client preferences down to how they took their coffee. I was good at my job. People trusted my memory. My boss used to joke that I was the human archive of our department. So it didn't make sense that at home, with the person I loved, my memory kept failing me in ways it never failed anywhere else. I remember thinking, maybe it's stress. Maybe I'm just tired. Relationships make people forgetful, right? That's what I told myself, lying in bed at night, running through the day's conversations like I was studying for an exam I didn't know I'd signed up for. The strange part wasn't the disagreements themselves. Couples argue. That's normal. The strange part was the specific shape of the arguments. They never really ended. They just dissolved into a fog where I was somehow always the one who misunderstood, misspoke, or overreacted. Every single time. I started noticing that pattern, but noticing it quietly, the way you notice a draft in a room without knowing where it's coming from. One night, I mentioned to my sister that I felt like I was losing my grip a little. I said it casually, almost as a joke. She didn't laugh. She just asked, "Can you give me an example?" So I did. I told her about the dry cleaning. About a conversation we'd had about visiting his parents, where he insisted I'd agreed to a date I was positive I'd never agreed to. About how I'd started writing things down on my phone right after conversations, just so I'd have some kind of proof for myself, even though I never showed the notes to anyone. Even saying it out loud, it sounded excessive. Paranoid, almost. My sister got quiet. Then she said something I didn't expect. "You know, you used to have the best memory of anyone I knew." What happened? That question sat with me for days. Not because it was cruel, she didn't mean it that way, but because it was true, and I didn't have an answer. Something had changed. I just didn't know if the thing that changed was my mind, or the story I was being told about my mind. A few weeks later, something small happened that I almost brushed past, the way you almost step over a crack in the sidewalk without noticing you almost tripped. We were at a dinner with two of his co-workers, people I didn't know well. Somewhere in the conversation, I mentioned an offhand detail, that we talked about maybe moving to a bigger place next year. He laughed, a little too quickly, and said to the table, "She does this sometimes. Makes up whole conversations we never had." Everyone chuckled, and the moment passed. But I sat there holding my fork, feeling something crack open in my chest, because I remembered that conversation clearly. We'd had it on a Sunday morning, sitting on the balcony, coffee going cold. I didn't say anything at dinner. I smiled along, because that's what you do. But in the car afterward, I asked him gently, "Do you actually not remember that conversation? Or were you just joking?" He looked at me like I'd said something absurd. It was a joke. Why are you making this a thing? And there it was again, that same fog rolling in, turning my simple question into an accusation, turning me into the person overreacting, again. That night was the turning point, though I didn't recognize it as one until much later. I got home, sat on the edge of the bed, and instead of trying to remember the conversation better, I asked myself a different question entirely: what if my memory isn't the problem? It's a small shift in wording, but it changed everything. Because up until then, every time something didn't add up, I'd been asking, what's wrong with me? That night, for the first time, I asked, what's wrong with this pattern? I started looking back, not at individual arguments, but at the shape of all of them together. And once I stepped back far enough, I saw something I hadn't let myself see up close. Almost every disagreement we'd ever had ended with me apologizing, doubting myself, or quietly editing my own memory to match his version of events. Not sometimes. Almost always. I remember opening the Notes app on my phone, the one where I'd been quietly logging conversations, just in case, and reading through months of entries in one sitting. Reading them together, not one at a time, was different. Individually, each note looked like a small misunderstanding. Together, they looked like a pattern with a purpose. I didn't confront him with anger. I didn't even confront him with certainty. I just started asking quiet, specific questions, not to catch him, but to see how he'd respond. What exactly do you remember me saying? Can you walk me through it from the beginning? And every time, his answers were vague in the same specific way, full of confidence, but empty of detail. He was sure I was wrong. He was never sure what actually happened. That inconsistency was the crack in the fog. Confidence without detail. Certainty without memory. I realized that the feeling I'd been calling losing my grip wasn't really about my memory at all. It was about slowly losing trust in my own perception, one small disagreement at a time, because someone else needed me to. I want to be careful here, because this isn't a story about a villain. He probably didn't wake up one day and decide to make me doubt myself. Some people do this on purpose. But a lot of people do it because it works, and it keeps working, so they never have to examine it. It's easier to be confidently wrong than to sit with the discomfort of being unsure. And when someone else is willing to absorb that discomfort for you, to say, maybe I did misunderstand, over and over, there's very little pressure to ever change. That's the part that stayed with me the longest. It wasn't really about him being manipulative in some calculated, movie villain way. It was about how easily two people can build a habit together, where one person's confidence quietly outsources the other person's confusion. I'd been a willing participant in my own doubt, because doubting myself felt safer than doubting someone I loved. The consequences weren't dramatic. I didn't storm out that night or deliver some perfect, clarifying speech. What actually changed was quieter than that. I stopped writing conversations down as proof for someone else and started writing them down as proof for myself. I started trusting the first version of events in my head instead of automatically softening it the moment he pushed back. And slowly, arguments that used to end in fog started ending in actual resolution, or at least honest disagreement, because I stopped handing over my memory the second it was challenged. We eventually ended things, and I won't pretend that was simple or clean. But the real shift happened before that, in my own head, long before any conversation about breaking up. The moment I stopped asking, what's wrong with my memory, and started asking, why does every disagreement end with me being wrong, something in me settled that hadn't been settled in a long time. What stays with me now isn't the specific arguments. It's how ordinary the whole thing felt while it was happening. No shouting, no obvious cruelty, just a slow, patient erosion of my own certainty, dressed up as forgetfulness, sensitivity, overreacting. It made me realize how much psychological pressure doesn't look like pressure at all. It looks like a normal Tuesday. It looks like being told, gently, that you're the confused one. I think about that sometimes, how easily confidence can be mistaken for truth, and how easily doubt can be mistaken for humility. And I wonder how many people are sitting in their own version of that car outside their apartment right now, trying to remember if they really said the thing they know they said, not because their memory failed them, but because somewhere along the way, they were taught not to trust it.